Because see, now I don't have to worry about some strings that I have attached, and as much as I love my job. But all they did was radicalize me, and so now they be afraid. See, now they about to see this other Cori, this other side, because let me say this. I just grew up a whole lot more over the last few weeks. Just grew up a whole different way.
Look, your defund the bunny scare tactics aren't going to work because that's not a police department. Police departments do not usually need orders from White House district attorneys to require police to call for medical attention after bones, heads, legs, or gunshot wounding protesters lying in the street, bleeding out, too broken to crawl, or in need of city morgue services. As the only post-Civil War municipality that required federal documents to explain that to them, then rewriting legislation for them to follow or be replaced by National Guards. That's the kind of behavior you would only expect from a racist Middle Eastern apartheid state. But wait, there's more to celebrate about the experienced job your police have done. Protect and serve. #1 murder rate per capita in the United States. No wonder you're clutching at your pearls at the thought of Cori Bush digging into whatever god-awful skeletons are in your closet.
Is AIPAC crowing about the $9 million it spent to defeat Congresswoman Cori Bush of Missouri?
Well, you can just hear from the reaction of progressives in Congress, from the squad or Bernie Sanders himself, that they're up in arms about this, but they do not know what to do. They have no idea how to counter AIPAC. And understandably, since the Citizens United decision and just the general power that the Israel lobby enjoys over U.S. government, where it simply sets U.S. Middle East policy, erases all red lines, there's very little that they can do except be progressives, except for Palestine, and reject the appeals of their base. AIPAC is running untrammeled over the Democratic Party, and it's playing a seminal role in shifting that, in making sure that the Democratic Party remains a right of center party, and just widening the conflict within the Democratic Party base. You saw, I think it was last night, in Harlem, a Kamala Harris after party get invaded, basically stormed by Palestine solidarity protesters. They are not letting up. And this is a preview of what we're going to see at the Democratic Convention. And AIPAC is fueling this conflict. So Cori Bush is going to tear AIPAC's house down. That's what she pledged to do. She was condemned by the Biden White House because they're afraid of the Zionist billionaire class that pumps so much money into their campaign coffers. What can Cori Bush plausibly do? There's very little that any American can do to stop this gigantic assault. Not assault. Let me put it another way. The biggest, this is the most malicious and explicit and obvious foreign meddling operation in U.S. history, and possibly in the history of any major superpower. And there's nothing any American can do until AIPAC is registered as a foreign agent. And once that happens, we're going to see that AIPAC operatives have been spiriting classified and private data out of congressional offices and out of government offices and showing them to the Israeli government and Israeli intelligence services. I guarantee it.
Are you and Aaron and John Mearsheimer and I, just a handful of us, the only ones who say publicly that the Zionists are in control of the United States government?
Well, they're in control of the parts that matter to them. And we're not the only ones. Everyone knows it. They just have different language for understanding it, or for explaining it. But it's pretty obvious that the Zionist billionaire class has veto power over any policy vis-a-vis the U.S. in the Middle East, and it's not serving American interests. It's not serving American interests when you have Harrison Mann, who was a Pentagon intelligence officer, one of the few higher level officers to resign over the Gaza genocide, writing in The Guardian, "Why are we putting American troops in harm's way for Israel?" And bringing up the example of 3 Black American service members who were just career soldiers who were obviously trying to advance in life by joining the military, as so many Black Americans did. And they were sent to a secret base on the Syrian border in Jordan, which was clearly put there to defend Israel's strategic depth. Has nothing to do with American national security.
Yeah,
and they were killed in a drone, strike.
Or it was put there as a tripwire.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of these bases are, yeah, you're right. They're tripwires. Like the Al Tanf base, for example, in eastern Syria, is a clear tripwire for Iran and the popular mobilization units backed by Iran. And so they were killed. They were sacrificed for apartheid Israel. And Harrison Mann's raising this question. Well, everybody can see it now. You can see it in the over 70 standing ovations Netanyahu got as he denied that any civilians were killed in the Gaza Strip, and just a complete lie fest. You can see it in all the laws being passed to criminalize dissent on Palestine, to criminalize and jail American citizens for protesting genocide. You can see it in the resignation of Manoush Shafiq, the pathetic dean of Columbia University, who called the NYPD on student protesters, but is really being forced to resign because she didn't go in hard enough. You can see it in the fact that the U.S. is mobilizing nuclear class submarines to defend Israel once again after Israel's insane assassination spree last week, that this government is occupied. And it's not anti-Semitic to say it when the majority of those who are clapping for Netanyahu like a pack of seals, as if he were the real leader of the United States, are Christian Zionists.
AIPAC, I'm coming to tear your kingdom down.
What you just told me is terrifying. Your belief that AIPAC members who work on Capitol Hill have spirited out classified U.S. documents and brought them to Israel. That's 20 years in a federal prison if they were ever to be caught and prosecuted and convicted.
I'm sure that's happening. And, the precedent would be the prosecution of Larry Franklin, by the way, not Jewish, AIPAC operative who did just that. There was once an Espionage Act investigation of AIPAC during the Bush era. And you look at the figures who've been involved with the Bush administration, the Bush neocons, whose views are strongly represented within the Biden administration now. Doug Feith, Richard Pearl. Richard Pearl was instrumental in the U.S. military operation to take out the Osirak reactor in Iraq, providing Israel with classified intelligence. And this is someone who's dedicated his life to supporting Israel. Douglas Feith as well has a picture not of any U.S. president on the wall of his office, but of Theodore Herzl, the godfather of Zionism. These are, effectively Israel firsters who have access to classified intelligence, and it's people like Julian Assange who get punished. The United Kingdom has passed a new law, the National Security Act, to punish any journalist or citizen who reveals information that could be deemed harmful to national security, and they decide what national security is. Right. But the Israel lobby there, what have they done? They took out the leader of the Labour Party with payoffs, as revealed in the Al Jazeera undercover hidden camera investigation, the Lobby UK, payoffs from the Israeli embassy to leaders of Labour Friends of Israel in order to go after Corbyn. So it's all right, staring us right in the face. And we need to call this what it is: the largest foreign meddling operation, possibly in U.S. history, using Jews as human shields and spreading anti-Semitism in the process.
Before we get to the Wall Street Journal, the intelligence officer whose name you mentioned before, you mentioned Larry Franklin, I forget the name. Is he talking about American boots on the ground in Israel or in Gaza presently or in the future?
Not quite sure what you're referring to, but
the person that you said resigned, the highest ranking intelligence officer to resign from the
Harrison Mann. He's talking about the presence of a new naval battle group in the Eastern Mediterranean to send a message to Iran that the U.S. is going to defend Israel after the Israelis assassinated the chief Hamas negotiator right before this upcoming round of talks in Doha. Ismail Haniyeh, who also happens to be the head of Hamas's Politburo, in the middle of Tehran at the inauguration of Iran's new reformist president, something that I am sure did not please the Americans. And now they're sending nuclear class subs. I mean, these are attack submarines. They are there to send the message that the U.S. can fire missiles into Iranian cities on behalf of Israel. And that's what Harrison Mann's referring to, because there are all these other U.S. troops, Judge, at these tripwire bases. It's not being reported in U.S. media, but around the Kanoko oil fields in northeastern Syria, the U.S. maintains several thousand soldiers. They are there to occupy 1/3 of Syria's land, where most of the oil and the wheat fields are. And they're working with the Kurdish SDF, the U.S. stooges, to deny that territory to Syria, and therefore deny Syria access to its own natural resources, to provoke starvation and poverty all across Syria, and to steal that oil and ship it out through the Kurdish mafia in Iraq, in Kurdistan. And it's a criminal operation. And the Syrian Arab army has trained and worked with local Arab tribes who are now beginning to attack those U.S. bases and fight to have that land back. There's a few English language outlets reporting this, like The Cradle. And it's really significant because you can see this as part of the wider trend of regional forces trying to push the U.S. out. And most Americans don't even know how deeply entrenched they are or how criminal their involvement is in the region. So that's what Harrison Mann's referring to. And it just shocks me that more people haven't resigned from the State Department or the Pentagon over this complete abuse of the U.S. military and just all Americans' birthright to defend Israel and its genocide, which has now killed over 2,500 children under the age of 2 in Gaza.
Wow.
With U.S. supplied baby buster bombs. another significant development, which points to how pathetic the administration in Washington is to challenge the Jewish ISIS in the Netanyahu administration, or Netanyahu himself, who is incredibly unpopular now. Okay, most Israelis, according to a new Israel Democratic Institute poll, want a ceasefire. It's now over 60%. The majority of those Israelis, however, do not support Netanyahu and don't support the Likud party members around him. But they think getting the hostages out is the most important thing right now. The Biden administration, in their good cop, bad cop routine, have leaked to one of their key stenographers in Washington, the Israeli reporter Barak Ravid for Axios, that they are going to consider calling out Netanyahu for not wanting the hostages out and sabotaging all of the ceasefire talks in Doha by constantly adding new, impossible to fulfill terms. And instead of doing that, if you look at the New York Times from yesterday, cover story,
Right.
what they did, this is citing senior administration officials, or like documents that only Biden officials would have access to. That Netanyahu adding impossible new terms to ceasefire deal to sabotage it. So basically the Biden administration, instead of calling out Netanyahu publicly, using the bully pulpit of the president of the most powerful country in history, has gone and leaked another story also to an Israeli reporter at an American publication. What is that going to do? That's all they've been doing for 10 months. So they're not actually undermining Netanyahu like they think. It really requires real action. And what Kamala refuses to do is an arms embargo, which would immediately force the Israelis to the table. Now they've put new terms and new conditions into the ceasefire negotiations. The Israeli military will be able to maintain permanent or indefinite control over the Rafah border crossing in the south, which means humanitarian aid won't get in. Continued starvation and typhus, diphtheria, all these preventable diseases. That's what they're adding. And the best the Biden administration can do is leak.
All this comes back to what you said on this program about 10 months ago. Joe Biden could stop all of this with one phone call. Kamala Harris could probably stop all of this with one.
And the phone call would be to Lloyd Austin in the Pentagon.
Correct.
No more weapons, no more
Netanyahu. Correct.
But instead, on the day after Israel struck the Tabin school in Khan Yunis, killing 100 people, mostly children, while they are praying at dawn prayers, and then leaked a fake list of Hamas operatives they claimed were there, most of whom were dead, already confirmed dead from months before. On that day of horror, when parents were forced to pick up the body parts of their children or locate their children through body parts in plastic bags, the Biden administration, and specifically Tony Blinken, authorized an $18.5 billion sale of weapons to Israel, including 30 F-15 attack jets, AMRAAM missiles, 120,000 155 millimeter howitzer shells, 120,000 120 millimeter tank shells. I mean, this is insane. There are no tanks in Gaza. There's no Air Force. What do they need what do they need aircraft to aircraft missiles for? They're arming them up for war.
I emigrated from West Philly to Oakland about 1980. This was on the tail end of a 1970 through early 1980 massive migration from the East Coast to California. Think escape from New York with broken pieces of New Jersey stuck to your socks. This was my people of shame, the baby boomers. Why were these Easterners fleeing as far as you could get from New York City and still be in the United States? Simple, because they're smart, like me. It was still affordable, especially in the East Bay. Weather is perfect outside of San Francisco. There are only 3 seasons, spring, summer, and fall. You're right on the ocean, an hour from the mountain ranges, and it's all rolling hills in between. I like this weird new world. I was glad I made the switch successfully. Like my new friends, especially the New York expats, who came with an extra gear and could really get some stuff done. I like being around other smart people. But the ones who are even smarter improve your game. That's the way it went the early years of absorbing California, absorbing us. I had not one but two Jewish girlfriends. Not at the same time. Couldn't talk a bit of that. I was pretty cute, but not that hot. Everybody was Jewish, even the punk rockers. This place was so Jewish, the classy place to take the date out on a dance was called the Ashkenaz. But I never ran into Zionists or anyone who had visited Israel. Meanwhile, back in the homeland, those AIPACers are staying busy, just cranking them out, busy, get her done. This one is from the We Think You're an Idiot department. Little informational memo here says, during this primary season, the pro-Israel mainstream has sent a powerful message that America stands with Israel. We do? What? All right, I'll check into that. And it stands with Israel as it battles Iranian terrorist proxies. Oh, that one again, huh? That one. Israel spent like the last 20 years trying to get our boys to get off our butts and get over there and get their asses shot off for a war with Iran. Been trying it for 20 years. They're persistent. I got to give them that. Voters across America are rejecting anti-Israel voices in favor of candidates who understand the vital importance of U.S.-Israel relationship. Translation: vote for any party you want. We own them all. Yeah, I said I was going to look into that America stands with Israel claim and see what we can find out.
As a Jewish man who feels a degree of guilt and shame for having been so weak on the Israel-Palestine issue for so long, I feel like anyone who can look at these images of kids with their heads blown in half and think that there is a lesser evil in this race is just delusional. There is no lesser evil when a genocide is happening, and anyone who supports that, whether their name is Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or RFK, can go to fucking hell. Period. The other part of this that I don't like to bring up too often because there's subjectivity here, but I don't like to bring up this stuff too much, although when you're a parent, you tend to mention your kids a lot. Look, man, I've said this on the show before. When I saw those twins who were killed that day, I saw my twins in those photos. When I wake up at night and my kid is sleeping next to me, I ask myself, what if I were in a tent in Rafah and a bomb could rain down on us any second and blow us into 50 pieces? So fuck all these people where they breathe. Fuck them all. And I think it is long past time that we start prioritizing the Palestinians for once. For once. They have been sold out for some other priority, whether it's a free school lunch on the Democrat side or this pipe dream that Trump is going to reform the FDA because he flattered RFK when he needed his endorsement. I'm sorry, man. It's a no for me. It's a no for me. This is delusional, and even where it is not delusional, I'm sorry. Like it's time to not rank the Palestinians underneath another issue. For one time. These people have been sold out for 75 years. Yeah, what Israel's doing is horrible, but something else comes up at the last minute and, oh, well, they're both bad on Israel-Palestine, so let's pick the lesser evil. I don't do lesser evil anymore. So if you ask me, gun to my head, who would I choose? That's one answer. But you know what? I don't have a gun to my head. I have a microphone in front of my mouth, and fuck them. Fuck them. That's all I have to say. That's a lie. That's not all I have to say, but that's all I'll say for now.
I don't know. I think I like the cut of his jib.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
There's a spring in his step.
I was born in Ferguson Hospital in 1955. When we left St. Louis in 1963, it was clear to me that at that tender age of 8, that St. Louis was not an amicable place for black people to grow up. In fact, I met a Houston police officer that has a mild case of PTSD from spending his childhood there. So on this particular subject, anyway, I know what I'm talking about and the actual true story of the obscenely racist city of St. Louis and a fearless activist named Cori Bush. You know by now it's the lobby that spent $9 million to take her down. One of the lame-ass excuses that they used was that she refused to sign a document condemning Hamas. She responded she doesn't even really know what Hamas is and turned them down. The black movement in St. Louis has always been insular. They don't want outsiders coming into their movement, and they don't even pay attention to what's going on in Chicago, much less Gaza. Fact, St. Louis remains to this day totally segregated. And there's this very distinct and very rich ruling class who are upset that some uppity woman of wrong color has made some threatening headway on reducing police brutality and dumping radioactive waste in black neighborhoods, to name just a few. So the Israeli lobby used their power and clout to throw an election that had nothing at all to do with the interest of our Israeli overlords or the United States. They did it because they could. It served only the interests of this tiny, old, racist as fuck elite ruling class community. St. Louis and the Zionist lobby are the mutated sisters born of the same orc. St. Louis, notorious for brutal racism, and the lobby that serves an apartheid state. So fuck them and the genocide they wrote it on.
Let me start with what happened on October 7th and talk about the Gaza war. And just for purposes of background, for putting a framework in your head, it's very important to understand that Israel today is what I would call Greater Israel. Israel controls everything between the river and the sea. And of course, that phrase is usually associated with Hamas. And what Hamas wants is to control everything between the river and the sea, just like Israel does. And the end result is that what you have today is a Greater Israel. And that Greater Israel includes what's called Green Line Israel. That was Israel before the 1967 war, plus Gaza, plus the West Bank. Okay, so there are those three areas that comprise Greater Israel. And what's very important to understand is that inside Greater Israel, there are roughly 7.3 million Palestinians and roughly 7.3 million Israeli Jews. There is rough equality between the two sides. So the question is, how does Israel think about dealing with Greater Israel, where you have rough equality between these two populations? And there are basically four options. One is you have a democratic Greater Israel. That's not going to happen because it would no longer be a Jewish state. Second possibility is a two-state solution. Everybody loves to talk about a two-state solution. That is not happening, certainly after what happened on October 7th, but even before then, and I'll talk more about this. Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli elite has no interest in a two-state solution, okay? The third possibility is apartheid, and basically what you now have is an apartheid state. We can go into this in detail in the Q&A if you want to do that, but if you look at Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem, which is the leading human rights group in Israel, all three of those organizations have produced lengthy reports that lay out why Israel is an apartheid state. The fourth option is ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing means getting rid of the Palestinians, for the most part, who live in Gaza and who live in the West Bank, and creating a Greater Israel that is completely dominated by Israeli Jews and has very few, if any, Palestinians in its midst. So again, the four options are, number one, democratic Greater Israel. Number two, two-state solution. Those two are off the table. Number three, apartheid, which is basically what you have now. And number four is ethnic cleansing, where you get rid of the Palestinians. Okay. Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about what the situation looked like before October 7th. And focus mainly on Gaza. Before October 7th, the Palestinians in Gaza basically lived in a giant open-air prison. What happened was that in 2005, when Ariel Sharon was the prime minister of Israel, he decided to pull the settlers out of Gaza. And in 1967, the Israelis cleansed huge portions of what is today Greater Israel. And the idea that they wouldn't do this, if you read all sorts of Israeli media, they talk about ethnic cleansing all the time. And it makes perfect sense if you think about it. Final point I'd make to you is one of the criticisms, and I'll talk more about this, of what the Israelis, and especially Benjamin Netanyahu, are doing in Gaza is they have not come up with a plan for what Gaza is going to look like after the shooting stops. In other words, what's the political solution here once the shooting stops? And Israeli military commanders, IDF military commanders, are constantly complaining these days that Netanyahu doesn't give them any sense of what the final political settlement's going to look like so they can deal with Hamas and deal with the Palestinians with some thought in mind about what the end game is here. The reason there's no end game, the reason they're not talking about how they're going to administer a Palestinian-dominated Gaza is because they want the Palestinians out. They want to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And then that brings us to the question, how do you do this, right? How do you get the Palestinians out? Well, first of all, they definitely went after Hamas to start with. That was the purely military side of the story. They went after Hamas. But to make ethnic cleansing work, you have to, number one, kill significant numbers of people, of Palestinians who are basically innocent Palestinians, not Hamas. You have to kill large numbers of them, and you have to give them a powerful incentive by killing them to drive them out. Number two, I could go through this in detail in the Q&A if people want to hear the story, but it is, as many people say, especially the UN people who are there, the place is unlivable. And the reason it's unlivable is because they're trying to cleanse Gaza. It's very important to understand that. And then finally, what they're doing is starving the population. There's all sorts of talk about famine in the northern part of Gaza. The United States is leaning heavily on the Israelis to let food and other kinds of aid in. The Israelis are resisting at every turn. Why are they starving the Palestinians? Why are they killing the Palestinians? Why are they making Gaza unlivable? It's very simple. They want to drive them out. So that's basically what's been happening. And in the beginning, right, there was all sorts of talk about genocide. And I was on the record publicly as saying this is not a genocide. But after December, I changed my mind on that. I think the Israelis are now engaged in genocide. And what's happened here is because they have been unable to get the Palestinians out, they've had to increase the amount of killing that they do, right? They're continuing to push to get the Palestinians out of Gaza. And the way they do that is just kill more and more people and make make the situation in Gaza more and more unlivable, right? So the situation is just getting worse and worse and worse, despite the fact that the United States, and actually the West more generally, are doing what they can help feed the Palestinians. So the question is, where are we today? Where are we today? First of all, they've not defeated Hamas. and they're not going to defeat Hamas. Kurt Campbell, who is the Deputy Secretary of State, basically said that yesterday. There are all sorts of stories in the Israeli press that they're not going to defeat Hamas. They haven't gotten the hostages back, and they have not been able to cleanse Gaza. They've not been able to cleanse Gaza. Furthermore, they're stuck in Gaza. They're there, right? They got out in 2005, and they're back there. This is not good. So what you see here is that Israel is in real trouble in Gaza. Now, in addition to the problem in Gaza, they have a huge problem with Hezbollah, because Hezbollah in the north, in support of Hamas, has been shelling northern Israel. And there are somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 Israelis from the northern part of Israel who have had to move into the center of Israel on a temporary basis and can't go home because Hezbollah is shelling northern Israel. And Hezbollah has said that until this all ends in Gaza, they're going to continue to fight the Israelis. This is a huge problem for the Israelis. So they not only have trouble with Hamas in Gaza, they have trouble with Hezbollah up on the northern border. And by the way, the Houthis are actually now taking aim at the Israelis, and the Houthis just recently landed their first missile inside of Israel. Just one, but that's a harbinger of things to come. You see how much trouble Israel is in. They have not achieved their objectives with regard to those two stated objectives and with regard to the ethnic cleansing. And as I said to you before, you always want to understand there are four options here. First two are off the table, and that comes down to apartheid or ethnic cleansing. And the Israelis understand full well an apartheid state. We remember what happened to South Africa. We have got to solve that problem. That's why ethnic cleansing is so attractive. But they've been unable to ethnically cleanse so far. That's that story. That's the story about Gaza.
It has been 11 months since the troubles began, sparked by a Hamas breakout of the Gaza concentration camp and following attacks on the Israeli military infrastructure, casualties on military and a significant number of civilians. Hostages were taken, somewhere in the hundreds. Israeli retaliation against Hamas has been very unimpressive, but the ferocity of counterattacks against civilians, primarily women and children, are nothing short of spectacular. 187,000 was the death count reported by Lancet, but that was in May. My guess is that somewhere around 250,000 have been executed, perished in fire, burned in rubble, starved to death, or taken by disease or exposure. That would be many times the casualties inflicted on civilians by the Nazis in the first year of the Third Reich. There's a disagreement as to whether or not this is genocide. The United States and Israel insisted it's not. Since those are two of the most unreliable resources of any empirical data on warfare, I will choose to go with the 6.7 billion who believe that it is. And I think we need to give the IDF and their support operations some help on this women and children dilemma. There seems to be a consistently inappropriate response to the phrase women and children first. It's unacceptable that if you would have stuck to Yiddish, you would be having all these word problems. I've also included some photographs of women and children so you can see what they look like. And as far as children recognition, I found a trick that seems to somewhat effective. You just tell them children look just like us, except for they're smaller. They're smaller. But it's one thing to train soldiers to be able to differentiate between a baby from a woman or a soldier, but preventing the actual behavior of killing them is still a horrific fail. But we think it may be related to them having to refuse a direct order. I've been working on role model tactics, so I want to share some personal thoughts. Let's start with women. I get along fine with most women. and I'm not that easy to get along with. I have a wife, so she's the alpha woman, and the other 3.5 billion don't seem like threats to me if you're just nice and not pushy, and try not to murder them. So back to children now. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but just take my word for it. The overwhelming opinion that children aren't capable of harming adults until they're at least 3. I know that people say that's a conspiracy theory, but really, do your own research, and you're going to find there's very little evidence of killer babies, except for in Texas. So keep the guns out of their hands and at least wait till they're 4 if you're going to cleanse them. Objects. For me, motorcycles. Just be careful. There's no reason to destroy them. Jews. I prefer secular American Jews. Nobody has ever gotten dumber hanging out with secular American Jews. But don't get fooled by cheap Zionist imitations, false prophets, and avoid Israelis at all costs. Some people swear by them, but they don't fool me. Okay, y'all are gonna love me for this clip, even if you hate me. It's number 1 on yucks, burns, jaw drops, and the truth hurts, don't it, injuries. Allow me to identify the characters for y'all. This guy is part of the U.S. Christian evangelical movement, the religious element of Israel's useful idiots. They have to starve their kids serving them leftover chicken scraps and cornmeal soaked in lard so they can fatten their tithing to the Texas far-right, gay-stomping, fist-pumping, Jesus cult hellboy. The honorless Reverend John Hagee, a demon so toxic the late John McCain refused to take his campaign contributions. U.S. evangelicals are the number 1 non-governmental contributors to Israel, more than Jewish Zionists. He's taking one of those free tours of Jerusalem as a thank you gift from Israel. Coming up next, just a few of the elite scholars produced by Israel's most celebrated schools and universities. But I noticed something. I've seen it before. I've lived all over the United States, West Virginia, Appalachia. You know what I'm talking about, right? You know. Once you've seen it, you recognize it. It's the eyes. They're kind of offset, not in the right place. That's the give. Check it out. These folks here are armed guards to protect the evangelical Christian tourists from the Israeli settlers. So they're protecting the donors who give the money to Israel from Israelis, the recipients of these gifts, who would be stomping and beating them like they were Palestinian if it weren't for the cops. Israel, truly the land of mystery, an enigma dissolved in a broken paradox, bleeding nightmares.
This is the situation here. Christians and Muslims are suffering. It's not justice in here. It's not democracy in here.
We are treated like a low-class people here in this country, in Israel. We face all kinds of discrimination everywhere, wherever we go.
I feel like I don't belong to here.
You are asking Israel if it treats Christians or Muslims different. No, it's exactly the same. We are under the same occupation.
You don't have like a human being rights.
And is this all Christians generally, or?
Anybody who is like not Jewish, I think.
The Muslims protected the Christians, protected the churches, and that's why churches are existing. Muslims could have destroyed, all of the churches and killed all the Christians 800 years ago.
Go to Bethlehem scene, shops beside the others, Muslim and the Christian.
The Middle East, and this whole area, many minorities lived under Islam. Even Jews. We all know that Jews were protected by Muslims in Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia from the Christian Inquisition. No, they did not pay taxes, when the Muslims came.
Church has been closed because the Jerusalem municipality charged the churches here a tax on the property tax, which was about $190 million.
After 50 years, she changed the law and make us pay taxes from the beginning of the Israel existence till today.
When the Israeli government closed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, there is a lot of Christians was standing side by side with Muslims. The same as well when they closed the Church of Holy Sepulchre, you could find a lot of Muslims are standing with their brothers Christians.
With the high taxes will become a very heavy burden on Christians.
But they just like living on donations, they can't pay taxes.
The whole story is about one thing. The Israelis stole our land. That's the whole story. It's political problems, not religion problems.
Peace be upon you. From Jerusalem, the center of peace.
You are Jewish. Your parents were in concentration camps. And I wonder if you worry about sort of the fact that the impact, I should say, that rhetoric like that can have, whether it's about, fueling a rise in anti-Semitism or opening a door for people to be anti-Semitic in their criticism. I just wonder how you've rationalized those two things with particularly the sort of, the language that you're using to talk about the state of Israel.
Well, look, Ali, I'll treat you as somebody I know and not try to put on an air and estrange one from the other. I'll give you an honest answer. I would say there was a point in my life where my self-identification as Jewish would have caused me to hesitate before uttering statements or descriptives of the kind I just did. And I'm speaking with complete candor, and I think with utter sincerity. And I know what I'm about to say will probably surprise you. I don't see Israel as a Jewish state. It's a type. The Israeli type is not the type I grew up with as a Jew. As a Jew growing up, being Jewish meant being cerebral. Yes, it meant being cerebral. We took great pride. Can you imagine the pride Jews took in the fact that the four great figures of the modern world, Einstein, Freud, Marx, and some would include Jesus, were Jewish? We surged with pride at that fact. Do you know the kind of pride we took? That 25% of the Nobel laureates are Jewish, even though they represent 0.00002% of the world population? Yes, the life of the mind loomed large being Jewish. It also meant being creative. And creative also with a kind of Shlemiel. It's hard to translate Shlemiel. It means kind of weakling aspect. So for us, a Jew meant Woody Allen. It did for us growing up. Or Franz Kafka with the big ears. That was being a Jew. Lining up along a perimeter fence and targeting double amputees, sorry, that has nothing to do with a Jew or Jews as I grew up understanding that notion. So I don't feel Israel as a Jewish state. I don't. I think it's a lunatic state. So it doesn't, at this point in my life, I don't feel the kind of conflict personal conflict that you allude to. However, I do recognize that Israel calling itself a Jewish state and carrying on as it does is going to increase the danger of anti-Semitism. But that's a problem, in my opinion, first of all, created by the state of Israel. I would much rather it not call itself, Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people. I would rather call itself Israel, the nation state of the lunatic people, or Meshuggah. We have in Yiddish the expression Meshuggah, which means crazy. So the nation state of the Meshuggah people, that would, I think, diminish the prospects of anti-Semitism increasing as Israel carries on. And then the other side is, fortunately, we've reached a point where a large number of Jews have, to use an expression I heard a few months ago, have checked out of Hotel Zion. Which is to say they don't want to have anything to do with the state, and that's a good thing. Now, let me be clear, so there's no room for misapprehension. There are many states which have gone through lunatic phases. So was the United States. It expelled and exterminated the indigenous population, and also it enslaved the African population. So it's a double sin in the case of the United States. In the case of the US, one wrong effectively could not be rectified. The native population was exterminated in large part, and the remnants that remained were confined to reservations. And there's no turning the wheel back on that. In the case of the African Americans, it was a complex, protracted struggle. You will be surprised, I think, to learn it cost the lives of 700,000 Americans. The Civil War was a very bloody episode in our history. And then it required a second struggle, the Civil Rights Movement, and it will require many more struggles. But I wouldn't describe is American civil life, political life, given who may be president next, and given who's president now, lunatic is still well within a reasonable vocabulary. But in terms of civil life, no, I wouldn't regard the United States as a lunatic state anymore. So when I describe Israel as a lunatic state, it does not mean to me it's unredeemable. But what's going on now? Starving 1 million children to death? 1 million children to death? That's insane. Sorry. If you lost your capacity to see the innocence of children.
Truth or consequences? What'll it be? Surely there will be some repercussions for the United States following Israeli orders, technically war crimes, to continue delivering weapons and intelligence necessary to assure the genocidal extermination project proceeds without interruption. And yet it's true that the United States remains the most powerful nation in history to be run by a foreign nation. And we have a very fair-minded, progressive, unswerving diplomatic understanding with most of the nations where we have opened military franchises with extra fries. It's called the "here it is, if you don't like it, go fuck yourself" doctrine. But for how long? Things have changed. Yes, we have Japan, Australia, and Europe barefoot and pregnant, but there's a history of abandonment that comes along with it. And the epic blunder, resurrecting the Cold War with Russia by catapulting Ukrainians into artillery emplacements while leveling sanctions for Putin to dance on while establishing counter banking systems that are the beginning of the end of the petrodollar monopoly, then forming economic alliances through BRICS that breaks the World Bank's and American international loan sharking. It is already in control of more funds and assets than the G7. So expect huge sanctions, boycotts, and liquidation of Goldman Sachs stocks, U.S. government bonds, and canceled trading agreements with what's left of the industrial base. And hell yeah, the 5 billion majority population of the planet will make us pay dearly for genocide or war crimes. You don't have to look far to find nations where we overthrew their governments, mostly democracies, and replaced them with tyrants and military juntas for oppression, torture, and disappearances. So maybe 3 years from now, it will be the U.S., Israel, and 2 or 3 remote islands nobody ever heard of, versus the 7-to-1 global majority. Israel may achieve half their goal, and there's 3.5 less humans they have to deal with. NATO collapses under its own weight. U.S. is trolling for loans, but nobody's answering the phone. Israel drained their U.S. military capacity, which stalls their ethnic cleansing blueprints because no more baby-bouncing buster bombs can compete their genocide. Perhaps the U.S. will consolidate the Monroe Doctrine and Chicarto method and begin strip mining South America until outgunned or the economy collapses into its own infinite gravity well. Oh yes, there will be a supernova of consequences, lined up to strip the failed American century down to parts, melting it into raw materials available at rock-bottom prices to developing countries in the southern hemisphere to level the playing field. That enabled the United States to rise to the global hegemon after World War II was not Patton, Battles of the Bulge, D-Day, and G.I. Joe. We didn't even join the war until the last year. It was the advantage of being an industrial power far out of harm's way while the rest of the world was reduced to smoking rubble. We are a vast, geographically isolated nation that is impervious to invasion. Nobody of sane mind would attempt to overrun the USA, and that's a constant we still enjoy. Another advantage is our agricultural output. Despite our future as a genocidal pariah and a violent bully, the network of military franchises are overrun and sent home on the range. People still gotta eat, and we can still grow a lot of food. We will just have to get up a little earlier in the morning, and maybe, just maybe, nobody has to die. All right. Out on the town tonight, again, with my new old friends, tangible and imaginary. It's been 30 years since we made our exodus, thousands of miles over mountains of freezing desert heat and burning ice. The sons of Abraham and daughters of Ham, beside the master debunkers of Israel's lies, united, we faded and slid back to the ruthless Chicago vacuum into despair, tube shooting down the skies of Chicago to shatter on the gates of freedom's lost. The glow of every polka dot in the rainbow fade to black. We failed. Epic. They beat us down like we were feral Palestinian street dogs without breaking a sweat. My feet went numb and my brain froze in place. A broken reflex bitch slapped my sagging jaws and shrieked, "In the immortal hedges of crisp wood." We don't fight fascists because we think we're going to win. We fight them because we're fascists. and then stood there with my fist in the air, gone dead, silent. Because my colleagues, they're smart like me, it was clear I had eaten the proverbial big dick blowing that line as I felt the slap of a life ring into my face, and a voice rang, perhaps that was Christopher Walken. Weeping with gratitude, I replied, just fuck 'em all. But hear me out. I've been down a lot lower than this. We can't lose hope. I was once a genteel, soft-spoken boy from Oklahoma, whose father had to move the family to Philadelphia to keep his job. My southern speech and ignorance of surviving harsh city environments made me a prized trophy for harassment, beatings, stompings, and unspeakable humiliation from the inhabitants that dwelled in the city of brotherly love. But my descent into hopeless despair was rapid, and within months I transformed my educational experience to extracurricular depravity, from the desk to the streets, hanging with dropouts, knucklers, and junkies, shoplifting liquor stores and stealing cars. My contempt was purified and singular, which turned out to be accurate when a judge had me interned in a juvie facility the week of my 14th birthday, where I spent the next 2 years of my life thinking about it and learning how not to get beat up, and many other fascinating things. And that little girl was me. So there were some subtle differences in backgrounds, and apparently I was the only one in the gang whose relocation involved running from the law, as it was interpreted by the Philadelphia police, which I managed to lose with a feint toward Houston airport, then quick cash tickets to Sacramento and a bus ride to San Francisco. Yeah, I was that little girl too. In retrospect, I was a composite of little Kamala's t-shirts stuffed into a plastic garbage bag with some expired souls she bought on sale to gift her new lobby appointment manager. And as these few days had passed and our cabal grasped the magnitude of our unconditional surrender, sunk in, we settled down into who we really were and how alike. Immigrants in a strange new world, 1,000+ miles from homes and family, making our way, life's cinema of reality without a script. Just another batch of untrained activists who meant well, but had no idea where to start, or even how to find the offices of the Department of Revolutionary Reconstruction.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah?
You spoke about the high death rates of women and children compared to combatants.
I did.
You're asking the wrong question.
Okay.
Only women can reproduce. They deliver children, and their children are the future. They are being killed off deliberately by an apartheid state that is landscaping its own future. Just thought you'd like to know.